Hi, I'm Dave Engelbretson, and along with LeRoy Hyatt, we'd like to welcome you to another edition of Fly Tying, the Angler's Art. And as usual, we've got a good mixture of flies tonight. We're going to tie a special version of the woolly bugger called the Sela bugger, and then we're going to do a dry fly called the Coyote Dry fly, which is a new one on me. I've heard of it, but I don't know the pattern.
Okay. And
finally, we'll do the very, very popular Prince Nymph.
All right.
Now, what are you going to use on this Sela bugger, and how is it different from a woolly bugger?
Well, okay, we'll go through it. I will use brown marabou for the tail. I'm going to use a grizzly dyed mahogany, or a very dark brown. The fly will be weighted. I will use a brown dubbing that I have mixed some orange flashabou with it. You can probably see it flash in the camera. The ribbing will be copper wire, and I'll use a brown thread, standard 6/0 thread.
You're tying this pretty big, aren't you?
Well, this one is about average. This is a 4X long, size 6. And I'll go ahead and dress the thread, or the hook, with thread.
Now, we might remind people, we tend to think of this as a big Western type streamer pattern, but for those of you who fish smallmouth bass in the rivers, wherever you fish, this fly is going to work on smallmouth bass, we can guarantee it.
Well, I first saw this fly tied in Seattle 2 or 3 years ago, and I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to it. I thought, yeah, that's nice, I'll go home and tie some. Well, I got home and couldn't match the fly exactly, so I went back a year or two later, and he was back again. Denny Rickards is the guy's name that was tying it. And this time I remembered it. I tried it first of all on a lake, phenomenal fly on a lake. Then I've tried it on the Clark Fork in Montana. Works very well. I remember one thing Denny said. He said, now you guys just use this in the lakes because I don't want you in the streams using my fly because you'll fish it all out. And I thought to myself, yeah, right. But it does work very well.
And I suspect if you tie it in a burnt, dirty orange and use it for smallmouth in a stream, it'd look pretty much like a good crayfish pattern.
Could well.
So you bass fishermen out there, especially you smallmouth fishermen, you'd be alert to this one.
But this one, when that large stonefly does start to hatch, they do take on a little bit of an orange tinge. And that's why the gold rib and the orange in the dubbing.
So you think the fish might be taking this as a big salmon fly nymph?
Evidently, yes. I really think they are.
Huh.
Now I'll go ahead and pull just a few fibers of this off and tie it in. I'll clip those butts off. I don't need them. And this tail is really tied reasonably short for a woolly bugger.
If they're going to take it as a nymph, yeah, it shouldn't be too long.
Pinch that off with my thumbnail. I did not cut it. If you pinch it off, it'll come out a little smoother. Now I'm going to take a piece of the copper wire, and this is a little bit different way too, maybe, of doing this. Maybe some of the viewers have not seen this. I'll leave the copper wire all the way back here at the back. I'm not going to tie the hackle in at this point. Now you can see that's really a nice, pretty dubbing.
Yeah, and this is the variation that you were telling me about ahead of time, that most of the time you'd wrap that palm ring hackle in right after the rib and then dub the body and wrap the hackle. But notice he's not doing that now. He's going to do the body before he puts in the ribbing material and essentially put that rib on backwards.
Well, this just really works better for me, so I've just kind of stuck with doing it this way. Now we'll just start this rib forward.
You're going to taper it, I suppose, fairly
it will taper, yeah. As soon as it starts up on that wire, or that lead, it will start to taper real well. But when you put this fly in the water, it looks like it's just emitting an orange light from the inside, if the water is anyway clear at all.
And tell us about the dubbing again, that you dyed it straight and added the little bit of orange flashabou. It's not a blend of colors?
No. Denny used a real seal fur. I don't have access to that much seal, so I'm using an African goat. It's called fiery brown color.
I was going to comment on that. Probably why it was called the Sela bugger, because it did use the real seal.
He did really use seal,
which would have even more of a iridescent glow to it.
Yes, very much. Now, he did not mix any of that flashabou in with that. He did not blend any of it.
Well, it's probably a good idea, though, since you're not using the real seal.
Yes, it does help the fly.
And you could even add a little pinch or two of orange dubbing into a blend.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure you could.
If you wanted to give it a little more rusty color.
Now I'm going to tie this hackle on at the front.
And again, you're tying the big end in.
I'm tying the large end in, and then I'm just going to palmer this to the rear. And I want this in really fairly wide palmered sections. Mm-hmm. Now, how am I going to capture that hackle? I still have my rib back here, so I'll just grab it with about 3 or 4 wraps of that ribbing, and that will hold that in place very well. Mm-hmm. And now I'll just come forward with this rib, which will also bind down that hackle and make the fly that much more durable.
And you're not counter-wrapping it.
I am not counter-wrapping. The only thing I really wrapped backwards, in essence, was the hackle.
Yeah. And for viewers that might not be familiar with the term, when we say counter-wrap, we're talking about wrapping in the counterclockwise direction. I had to stop and think that through.
Instead
of the clockwise direction.
Instead of.
Yeah. Normally, when you wind things on the hook, you wind over the top of the hook and away from you, which is mm-hmm. essentially then in a clockwise rotation.
And then just build yourself a little head here. You know, the first time I used this fly in a stream was on the Clark Fork in Montana. Uh-huh. And I didn't know for sure if it would work or not, but I would not go back to fish that stream again without it, especially early in the year.
Well, that's interesting. Well, it's certainly a good-looking fly, and again,
just a different variation.
I've got to alert you smallmouth fishermen out there. I know that's going to catch smallmouth and maybe make it a little bit rustier color.
A little bit more orange color, you mean?
A little bit more, yeah. Because it's heavily weighted and it's going to get down and it might look like a crayfish.
Yeah, it well might.
But
that's
if I
the
was
seal
out on the
bugger.
Susquehanna or some of those smallmouth rivers that we know are good, boy.
You can come in here now and pick out. I just broke my bobbin, or my bodkin.
You are so strong.
I am. But that's the seal
bugger. That's always impressed me about you.
Okay. The tail is brown marabou. The ribbing is copper wire. The dubbing is fiery brown with orange mixed in with it. And the hackle is dyed brown.
Now we're going to go to another fly which does double duty, both as a panfish fly and as a trout fly, particularly a cutthroat fly, you tell me. It's a fly called the Coyote. And tell us a little bit about the Coyote.
Okay, the fly was first shown to me by a fellow in Lewiston named Denny Moore. I was teaching a fly tying class. Denny came in and asked if I had ever heard of the fly. No, I had not. He told me that his grandfather had developed the fly in Montana, and it worked very well. As soon as he showed me that red body, I immediately thought of cutthroat, and it probably would work for panfish.
Well, you know, it's very similar to a panfish fly that we used to use in Minnesota. Very similar materials. As I recall it, in addition to the red body, it had a yellow ball of chenille for the butt, and I can't remember the name. I want to call it the Thunderbird or something. I just don't remember. But as soon as you laid out those materials, I said, oh, I know that fly.
All right. Well,
it's not really the Coyote, but you pan fishermen, if you tie it in panfish sizes, it's going to catch bluegills and sunfish and crappie and brim for you.
All right. For the material tonight, we'll use a grizzly hackle. We'll mix that with brown hackle, tie the both in together.
That's going to be a tail?
No. No. The body material is red stretch yarn or red floss, whichever you'd like to use. The tail and the wing material will be the brown or natural deer hair. I'll use a standard dry fly thread. The hook I have in the vise is a standard dry fly hook. It's a size 12. I'm going to go ahead and start this thread, dress the hook, run it to the rear, like always. And then I'm going to take just a little section of this natural deer hair, which will become the tail.
You know, I've noticed when you tie that your materials are so appropriate to what you're doing. You've got, for example, beautiful deer hair in various sizes. Mm-hmm. You've got long when you need long, and you've got light when you need light colors, and now short and very fine and uniform. And I think this is important to stress to the viewers, is that when we say any particular material, whether it's deer hair or whatever it is, that doesn't just mean grab a hunk of the stuff.
That's right.
But look for the appropriate type for the job you're trying to do.
Yes.
Because this fly would look considerably different if you had other type of deer hair.
Too large. Now you can use a lighter color. You can even use a light elk hair if you wanted to do the same thing.
You know where in the deer this might have come from? Because that's so short and uniform.
Well, I'll make the tail, again, about the length of the shank of the body, or the shank of the hook. I'll cut this off at an angle. Now, I'm not going to pull hard on that yet. I'm just going to very soft wrap, and then I'll come back a little harder. And I want to make sure that I get that bound down good so it's not going to roll around the hook at all. Now I'll take a piece of this, either red yarn or red floss or this stretch nylon, either one.
I like that stretch nylon better than floss in most cases because it won't change color as much.
It holds its color very well in the water, and it's quite water resistant. It will float well.
A little trick, I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but if you are using floss for applications that call for floss, if you give it a drop or two of Rod Builder's color preserver, it will strengthen the body, but it will also prevent that color change when the fly is wet.
Oh, I bet it would.
Yeah. I've only started doing that in the last year or so, and it, like on a Royal Coachman, it keeps that red band.
Now I'll run this forward, and you can see it does make a nice little red body. And for some reason, at least I found it this way, cutthroats seem to really key in on red.
I think they do.
Red body. I can't tell you why, but they sure do. Now this wing, we've talked about this a little before, will be tied trude style, which is just laying back over the top.
And again, for viewers that aren't familiar with the term, it's trude, T-R-U-D-E.
We'll lay it up here, get a measurement, and I'll trim it off at an angle. Again, I'm going to soft wrap till I get all the butts bound down, and then I'm going to come back harder. Make sure it all stays right on top of the hook. I've got some straggler butts hanging down here. I'll just come in and trim them off. I want to go over this just one more time. Now I'm going to put a little drop of this rubber-based glue on it, and then I'm going to wrap the hackle right into it. It serves two purposes. Not only does it bind the hackle well, it also will soak into those butts, and it will not let that fly move now, or that
we
wing.
Have new viewers to the show all the time, and we keep referring to this rubber-based cement, and we've described how to make it several times, but it probably is in order to do it again. That when we're talking about this rubber-based cement, basically we're talking about this synthetic rubber material that you repair tennis shoes with. There are a number of different brands out there available, but you get some of that stuff and you thin it down with either toluene
or
a lacquer thinner, and get it to the consistency you want. And it really is helpful, especially in deer hair operations.
And when it dries, it's there. It's there forever. Now I've wrapped a brown hackle forward, and I'm going to come with the grizzly, take one wrap behind, and then just kind of zigzag through. I zigzag that so it does not bind down the hackle that I just wrapped on. Now I'll capture the grizzly while I'm right there, trim them both off, and that's nice with this long saddle. You can save those and tie another fly with it.
Sure.
I'll put a small
whip on it. You finish that fly up, and you take it cutthroat fishing, and I'll go out and catch me a mess of brim.
Oh, really? I'll bet you could.
Oh, yeah.
I'll bet you could. Now, that's the
Might make
coyote.
it a little smaller.
Yes. I'll rotate it around so you can get a good idea of what it does look like. You can see that red body just really shine through.
Yeah.
And the brown and grizzly kind of set off that deer hair. Dress the fly, float it through a heavy riffle, and see what it does.
Should float very well.
It will. That's the coyote. It has deer hair wing and tail, a red body, and brown and grizzly hackle mixed.
Our last fly today is going to be the ever-popular Prince Nymph. It's used all over the country as an excellent trout pattern, but maybe after we get into it, I'll talk about some controversy that surrounds the fly. It's often misnamed. Or mistied, or they'll tie a little variation of it and call it the Prince when it really isn't true to pattern. But tell us what you're going to use, and we can talk about that a little later.
All right. We will put a beard of brown hackle on the fly. This will go all the way at the very front. The body material will be tied with several strands of eyed peacock herl. The tail will have 2 brown goose biots, and the wing cases will be 2 white goose biots. And I really have no idea what those represent.
I don't either.
But it's a very effective fly. And we'll rib the fly with the oval gold tinsel. Standard black dry fly thread will be used. I have a 2X long size 10 in the vise. And I will dress the hook shank, as we always do. And I don't know, have we mentioned why we dress this hook shank?
Well, you may have, but
show?
I think it bears repeating because it's something I always do too, and I think it's important.
Mm-hmm. I'll get some a brown goose biot up here, and I'll be cutting it off while I'm talking about that. What it does, it puts a base of thread down on the hook shank so that the material that you're going to put on that hook shank now will not slip around.
Yeah, it just overwraps the thread, kind of bind it in. It makes the hook a little softer.
It sure does.
And we've said it before, but we'll tell you again what the biots are, B-I-O-T-S. If you look at the wing quill of ducks or geese or turkeys, but especially ducks and geese, you'll find that the main part of the feather is off to one side of the stem, but on the short side of the stem, which is really the leading edge of the feather, are these short, stiff fibers, pointy feathers called biots.
And that quill has just been stripped separated.
Off, just separated from the wing quill. And you'll see the shape of these things as they go in, and they're very effective when used as nymph tails or in some cases as antenna.
Now this has a natural curvature to it. You can see it's now curving up, and I want that curve to go away from me, so I'm going to lay it on the opposite side of the hook of my cell and tie it in place. Now I can adjust that length just by pulling on the biot and forcing it through. This one now I will have on my side.
And the orientation of the plane of the feather is really parallel to the water. It's flat.
Yes. And now I'm going to just run along and dress or tie the rest of those butt sections down.
It's possible some patterns do want those biots in a vertical position too, and you can bind them to the side of the hook without turning them over. So
that's
you
what
have your
I've
option.
done. Yeah, I have bound this in that way.
But you have your option of whether you want them flat and parallel to the water or standing up edgeways.
Now I put a little coating of the rubber-based cement on. Now I'm going to get the ribbing, and I'll cut a small section of this ribbing off that we'll use to go up through that peacock.
Some people use a narrow flat tinsel for ribbing, but I much prefer the oval.
I do too. I've just always used it. And then the body material, we'll use the peacock herl. And again, it's hard to tell how many peacock herls. I mean, if you want a real sparse thin body, use fewer herls. If you want a larger one,
and it depends,
more.
Of course, on the quality of the herl you've got. If you've got good bushy ones, it might only take a couple.
You bet. All right, I cut off the tips, and I always tie them in by the tips because that's where the most of the herl is, at least the better
probably
herl.
A little more flexible too. When you come to wrap it on, they don't break.
Now I'm going to take one wrap around. I want to go behind my ribbing, and I'm going to clip those butt sections off. I don't need them there at all. And now, like we've done in other shows, I'm going to just make a little peacock rope. By wrapping that around that tying thread, it makes that peacock very durable. It will not break on you as readily. If it does break, it won't come unwrapped.
That's right.
Now I've gone one wrap behind the ribbing, so that ribbing, when I do wrap it on, will not come down over the tail.
And you did put some of that tacky rubber-based cement on the thread, didn't you?
On the base of the hook.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the thread wrap of the hook, so that it's probably still just tacky enough, so it'll help hold that body down even better.
I've come up to the front. I'm going to go ahead and tie this down. Take a couple of good wraps on that.
Oh, I was going to tell you about this little controversy, and I hope I get this straight for the sake of my friends who are pretty fussy about such things, and I'm sure to hear from them if I don't. Gene Trump, I'm talking about you. Most people, this, as far as I know, is the standard tie with the brown biots for the tail and the white biots for the wing cases. As we said, which make no sense because they don't look like any natural wing cases, but it's a very effective fly. But some people tie this with brown biots for the wing cases and using black dubbing for the body. And this is another fly with a different name, and it's got brown in the title, and I can't even, at this point, I've got a mental block, I can't think of what the other name is.
I'd never heard of that.
But if it's got black fur dubbing body and brown buyout wing cases, it's not a prince, it's something else.
Okay. Now I'm going to reverse wrap this rib, and I don't want the wraps real close together. I'll just come forward with it.
Now reverse wrapping it, in this case, helps it stand out from the hurl. It doesn't go down and disappear, and it also reinforces the body again.
Correct.
So this should be a very durable body. You've got the rubber-based cement underneath it. You've got it wrapped around the thread and being bound down. You've got it reverse wrapped with the hackle. That thing's not going to come apart.
No, I hope not anyway. Now I'll get a brown hackle, and I'm going to do it a little bit different this time than we've done on other shows. I'm going to just grab a hackle here, and I'm going to tie a beard.
Now, a beard, or sometimes they call it a throat hackle, it just comes underneath the hook.
Same thing.
Yeah.
What I'm going to do is just pull a very few of these fibers off. I'll pull them off both sides of this feather. I wish maybe it was a little bit longer, but we'll see if we can make it work. I've got them as even as I can get them. And this is where a rotary vise comes in nice. I've just turned the vise over. Now it's exactly as if you were going to tie in a tail. If I can get them laid on top of there. All right, I'll do it the other way.
Interestingly enough, sometimes I do it that way, but and I tie with a rotary vise too, but as many times as not, I'll just stick those fibers in underneath the hook at an angle and wrap them in and pull them into position as I'm tying them down. So if you don't have a rotary vise, it's still certainly easy to do.
Absolutely. And you don't need a whole lot of barbs underneath that hook. They're just going to act as little legs, and you don't need a whole lot of them.
Well,
now
if you get too many, they don't move as nicely.
No, they
we
don't.
want to create this illusion of life.
Because the more they're bound together if there's too many of them.
If there's too many, it's just too big a clump.
Now I'll take the white goose biots. I'll clip 2 of these off. And again, I tie them in one at a time. I have better luck doing that.
Yeah, I do too.
Now the first one I'm going to tie in with the tip going slightly away from me and laying flat over the fly body. And it's called a wing case. I know it is too, but it makes no sense to me why.
The fish sure like it.
Oh, this is
it's a very
excellent
popular nymph.
You can also weight this fly.
Yeah.
And it can be very effective when weighted. It will work both lakes and streams.
Oh, yeah. I think it's interesting to note the order in which you did this. For some reason, I always put the beard in as the last thing.
Oh, really?
You put the beard in and then put in the wing case.
And then tied the wing case.
Yeah.
That's
so it's just an interesting variation.
Way I have doing it.
Yeah.
Either way would not make any difference,
No.
I don't believe.
The main thing is to leave enough room at the head of the fly so you can get the beard in there and then not bind it down with later steps if you put in the wing cases later.
Now I'll put a whip finish on it.
I think this is a good universal pattern in much the same way as the zug bug is.
Oh, yes. And very similar.
Yeah, they're very similar flies. They're 2 of a kind. You can certainly use it anywhere in the country.
Yes, you can.
And again, you can either weight it or unweight it, or weight your leader ahead of the fly, which is often a good technique too.
I've seen a lot of people do that.
You know, a lot of people weight thead leaders by putting split shot in, and those are miserable to cast.
You don't
I
cast
much
them.
prefer to take sections of lead core line. You know, it could be 6, 8 inches, 10 inches long, as long as you need.
Depending on the depth you want.
And then I cut my leader at the leader knot, at the tippet knot, tie this in with a couple of uniknots, or prepare it ahead of time with loops, loop-to-loop connection, and you can adjust it very well to the depth you need, but it casts so much better.
Oh, I bet it would. Well, there's the Prince Nymph. We've used brown goose biots for the tail, peacock body ribbed with oval gold, a brown hackle throat, and a white wing case.
Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time here on Fly Tying, the Angler's Art.
Dave and LeRoy have produced a new 90-minute video on fly tying techniques. To order a copy, call the number on your screen. These tips are only $28.95 plus $3.95 shipping and handling. Please have your credit card ready and call 1-800-883-0124 to order fly tying techniques. You can also order the programs in this series. There are 3 programs on each 90-minute tape for $22.95 plus shipping and handling. Call 1-800-883-0124 and order your fly tying videos or the techniques tape.